And this is one of the most important topics that not many people are focusing on. I am addressing this topic in a couple of seconds. You will hear President Trump. You will hear legal scholars. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. The Supreme Court did not look at whether or not the conviction was constitutional. They simply allowed sentencing. There was no jail. He's not really a convicted felon because there was no jail, and the legal theories were contorted to fit a political narrative. These were the equivalent of parking meter tickets that were elevated to felonies. In this case, these were record-keeping issues that were elevated to federal law violations. Why? Under the belief that there was an FEC crime committed. The FEC dropped the case number 1. The DOJ dropped the case number 2. The Supreme Court will not allow a state to unilaterally decide what a federal crime, level of federal crime at anyone without the DOJ and FEC in this case involved. The state of New York, in an unconstitutional manner, convicted Trump of a federal crime without the Department of Justice involved. That is the definition of what would be considered unconstitutional. I believe it ties in directly to the 10th Amendment. But hit subscribe to this channel. D'Artagnan, thank you. Paul Bartlett, thank you. To my super chat, thank you. This is a Vox article. Will the Supreme Court nullify Trump's conviction? It's been talked about, not as much as I'm focusing on it, but this is John Yoo talking about... This is John Yoo talking about the fact that when it gets to the Supreme Court, and you will hear President Trump in 1 second, but when it gets to the Supreme Court, it will be overturned. And it has not gotten to the Supreme Court. Number 1, there was no FEC crime. The FEC dropped the case. 3 FEC chairmen have stated it was not a crime. Hans-A. von Spakovsky, Bradley Smith, and Trey Traynor have all stated there was no FEC crime. He could have paid Stormy with dollar bills if he wanted to. The main issue is that a state cannot level a federal charge without the Department of Justice involved. I don't believe there's precedent for that. I don't believe there's even an example of that in U.S. history. But hit subscribe to this channel right now. Let's get started. This is John Yoo. You'll hear President Trump in 1 second.
Appreciate what you said in your opening statement, because the Supreme Court has made clear, not just in one offside comment, in 3 very clear decisions, that only the federal government can enforce federal law. Only the Justice Department and the Federal Election Commission can prosecute and bring suit for violations of federal election law. They're the guardians of how federal election should run. And so what happened here is that the DA, approved by this judge, Judge Merchan, grabbed the authority away and basically decided to prosecute his own interpretation of federal law. That's not permissible under our separation of powers and federalism, and the Supreme Court will reverse if, as you say, Mark, they get a chance to hear this case.
So the Supreme Court will reverse. So the Vox article, will the Supreme Court nullify Trump's conviction? Yes, there's a 100% certainty. They haven't looked at whether or not it's constitutional. They simply allowed sentencing. There's a big difference between allowing sentencing and deciding whether or not a state conviction is constitutional. This, of course, was not constitutional. A state cannot level a federal crime. The partisanship, it's overtly biased and partisan. They went above and beyond trying to create these novel, unique, unprecedented legal theories. The statute of limitations had already run out on the record-keeping issue. Then they said he committed an FEC crime, but the Federal Election Commission dropped the case. So did the Department of Justice. So how on earth did the state convict Trump? Once it gets to the Supreme Court, it's game over. But this is John Yoo. Okay, no. Let's go ahead and listen to President Trump. Then you'll hear John Yoo's legal analysis as well. We'll talk about the legal analysis. But It's a done deal in the Supreme Court. It's just a matter of when it gets there.
Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This was a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, that inappropriately handled.
Really quickly, then we'll continue with President Trump. Number one, the immunity issue. There is presidential immunity that should erase the testimony of people like Hope Hicks and possibly Michael Cohen, who likely perjured himself just like he did in Congress, very likely. And so there is presidential immunity. There's the issue of federalism. A state cannot level a federal crime. And then there's the issue of no FEC crime was committed. I mean, they were so desperate to get Trump, and all they got was Trump winning the popular vote. I mean, it's almost as if they're on this losing path. They can't get off because that's the only thing. The only thing that Trump's adversaries know is this venomous vitriol. That's all they know. That's all they can muster up. They're not talking about Medicare for all or Green New Deal. They're not talking about any of that stuff. Nobody there is. They're just talking still about Trump and how he's mean. Meanwhile, listen, God bless the people in the West Coast, in California. God bless you. God bless everyone suffering of disasters in this country, especially what's going on right now in Los Angeles. God bless you. Democrats 4 years ago politicized beyond belief the you-know-what, and then they locked down states. They blamed every person that suffered or lost life on Trump, as if Trump deliberately gave them you-know-what. And then when Trump gives his 2 cents, they say, oh, don't politicize this. It's like, well, that's all you did 4 years ago. So much so you shut down society. And we don't have to get into it, but if you vote for inept people, okay, Trump is very competent. That's why he won twice. But if you vote for inept people, calamities that should have been addressed, unfortunately, will be greater than calamities. There'll be absolute unmitigated catastrophes. If you vote for people who are inept, who are just simply adhered to fringe, warped political ideologies because it suits them, then, unfortunately, a terrible tragedy could mushroom into a catastrophic, cataclysmic, unmitigated catastrophe and disaster of biblical proportions. I look at Trump and I say, God bless this man. He's a great president. He was a great president in 2016. He'll be a great president in 2024. I actually enjoy his personality. Sometimes, sometimes rarely I'll think, or say, maybe he shouldn't have said that. Generally, I don't really mind his personality, but I don't base things on public relations or image. I base things on competence. Are you competent? Do you get things done? For example, really quickly, and I'll just we'll listen to President Trump. If you believe the planet, I won't use the words because it's, of course, not algorithmically friendly. Okay, if you believe the planet is making, certain changes in terms of weather, okay, why, if you are governing a state or a city that every 4 years has a specific type of disaster, catastrophe, or natural disaster, a specific thing that takes place every single 3 to 4 years. It could be a red state or a blue state. But if every 4 years things are drier, things are more extreme, and you're blaming and you're saying that, hey, the Republicans aren't taking care of this topic. Okay, if you know that things are drier, things are windier, things are more volatile or dangerous from the perspective of they might actually exacerbate what takes place every 4 years in a certain city or region of the country, then why don't you prepare if you are this big proponents of protecting the planet? Why don't you foresee and prepare and make certain that because those bad Republicans don't address the issue of, how weather is being impacted by man's existence, why don't you then prepare a region or a state or a city or a county if you are a Democrat, knowing very well that's your platform? Protecting the planet is your platform, and you know that man is impacting the weather according to, okay, so I'm speaking in roundabout terms, but why don't you then simply say, oh, we are the Democrats. We have an iron grip on politics in this state. We're going to make certain that since we know things are dire when it comes to the planet and everything's more extreme in terms of weather, we're going to make sure and certain that, God forbid, if this or that or this happens every 3 years, we'll be prepared 100%. You think that was the mentality? How about no? So that's what Trump is talking about.
Before he got there, a gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney. And that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me, they were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work. I didn't call them electrical work. I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense, and for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, I haven't seen any to the contrary, not one. And none of these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly. But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that, Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated. And He was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington, but he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order.
And that's one of the many reasons it'll go to the Supreme Court. Hit subscribe if you're new to this channel. This is the biggest story that not many people are focusing on, and I'm going to obsess over this until the next, very major important story comes out. But this is like a really important issue. You can't be a president and have a gag order hanging over your presidency. You can't, and that's just one example. He's sentenced, and they say, well, it's an unconditional discharge, unconditional discharge, but there still are conditions. He's been sentenced by the judge. He might still have a gag order, and that means he can't, if he says anything about Stormy or Michael Cohen or anyone involved, there's an issue. You can't have that hanging over a presidency. The president should be allowed to speak about anything that he wants to. But Democrats know that everyone knows that they completely made this up. This was not an actual crime. This was the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, dropped the case. There's literally no rebuttal to that. You could be a lawyer on YouTube, and it's interesting. A lot of attorneys and lawyers on YouTube, some of them have very big channels, and it's very amusing because it's almost like they're very successful, they're very intelligent. They might not like Trump, or might think that Trump's always on the ropes, but it's like you find these channels or these pundits, it's like they present themselves like they're the only lawyer in the whole universe. It's like, no, every city has 1 million lawyers. It's not like, this isn't, you have your viewpoint, but I always look at the scoreboard. The scoreboard gives you a pretty good understanding of what's taking place, sometimes in terms of the law as well. Trump won the popular vote, the presidency, every battleground state. Every battleground state, the popular vote, the presidency, the Senate, the House, and he has the Supreme Court. So I mean, it's like scoreboard. Trump is up 55-0, and they're like, Matt Gaetz ethics report, and Trump's Jack Smith's report. Jack Smith resigned, by the way. And Democrats have, by the way, nobody waiting on deck to take over the Democratic Party. I pray to God every day. I pray, please God, please have AOC be the nominee. It would be the best thing that ever happened to this country. There might be another amendment Trump could run for a third time. Okay, erasing the amendment that prevents that from taking place. But it's like, J.D. Vance or even DeSantis would win the popular vote over AOC. So who do Democrats have? I pray to God AOC runs. I pray to God, if Bernie ran again, they'd cheat him again. He would say, "Oh, Kremlin, I don't want your help anymore. You're trying to help me by funneling left-leaning people to disparage the Democratic Party. But don't do that. Actually, just vote for the same people who cheat me every 4 years." As he claims to be the people's, champion. Anyway, it's a gigantic racket. That's why I say, vote for competent people. Let me tell you something. If it's a choice between Tulsi Gabbard or, Chris Christie, if Tulsi Gabbard was still a Democrat, I'd vote for Tulsi Gabbard, even though I'm more conservative on almost everything. I'm not beholden to any political party, definitely not the Democratic Party. I would vote Republican more. Trump populist Republican, not the never-ending military conflict Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld. I am against never-ending wars. That is the morally imperative, position, the moral position to take, which is why you vote Trump. Anyway, let's continue.
But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talk about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with the city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare.
Also, ladies and gentlemen, and hit subscribe if you're new to this channel, and to my super chat, thank you, Paul, and D, Artanya, everybody here, thank you so much. Paul, thank you so very much. Every live stream, so generous. Thank you. In Australia, to my viewers around the world, thank you. Trump won the popular vote with over 95% negative media coverage. Do the math on that. How does one win the popular vote with virtually 100% negative media coverage? If you're in a business, whether it's film or music or wrestling or whatever, boxing, if you're in a business, the circus, if you're in a business, where word of mouth, public relations, advertising is important. If you're toothpaste, whatever you're selling, okay, a supermarket. What if you had 24/7 negative media coverage and you still were successful? That shows that Trump is even more popular than they say he is. When they say those favorability ratings regarding Trump are nonsense. Trump is far more popular. Because you have to take into account the positive news coverage that Democrats get and their favorability rating, along with the negative, the overwhelmingly, almost entirely negative coverage Trump gets. And he still won the popular vote. So what does that tell you? It's the equivalent of somebody telling you, don't buy that car, and you buy 10 of those cars. His popularity cannot really be addressed without taking into account the negative media coverage and how he has overcome that negative media coverage. How popular, how truly admired is Trump if he's able to get the popular vote with almost 100% vitriol, venom, fake, phony, absurd headlines? Think about that.
Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump.
Judge Juan Merchan said.
Let's listen to John Yoo now. So basically, it's going to be overturned. I will just be talking about this all the time, every day, ladies and gentlemen, along with other topics also. But I will have uploads too. Let me know in the live chat if you want me to continue those uploads. Sometimes they don't do as nearly as well as the live stream. So I kind of, pulled away from them. But the Supreme Court, when they get it, will overturn. It will be a monumental, oh my God, it will be one of the greatest victories of all time for Trump.
Okay, that was ESPN host Stephen A. Smith going after New York Judge Juan Merchan and DA Alvin Bragg for their lawfare attack on President Trump in what legal pros call a biased, botched, and unconstitutional New York case over Trump's payment to Stormy Daniels. They say will likely get tossed out on appeal. Look who's back with us, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo. John, great to see you again. What do you make of all this?
I think Judge Merchan's quest to get his white whale, Donald Trump, is what we're going to see tomorrow. He's revealing the real political nature of what he and District Attorney Alvin Bragg in New York City have been up to all along, because he's already said he's not going to sentence Trump to jail. But he still wants to sentence Trump with just 11 days before Trump becomes president. So there's no time for Trump to effectively appeal this case. At the same time, we all know that Merchan is going to either have to throw the case out or hold a new jury trial at some point, because the Supreme Court on July 1st said that this trial was flawed. And so what Merchan's been doing, why I say it's political, is because he's dragged his feet for 6 months when he could have done either of these other things so that he could ensure that Trump would be the first.
So he's referring to the presidential immunity ruling.
Felon president in our history.
I mean, yeah, so he wants that asterisk against Trump's name. I mean, Trump asked the Supreme Court to intervene. This is the books and records case that really is a misdemeanors case. It's like parking tickets that Alvin Bragg, the DA, ramped up into federal felonies because he cited campaign finance violations. You know, the thing about that, John, he never proved that in any which way, shape, or form this changed anybody's vote.
Yes, actually, that's another reason, the one you just gave, why this whole trial was done in an unconstitutional manner. Put aside what the Supreme Court said in July, that President Trump has immunity, and that the exact kinds of evidence Merchan introduced were unconstitutionally introduced. The second point you just made, Merchan here and Bragg are trying to claim that Trump somehow stole the election, that he violated federal campaign laws. Well, that's up to the Justice Department and the FEC to prosecute. That's not up to any sort of two-bit prosecutor in New York City to try to relitigate the whole election out of 2016. The Justice Department looked into this. The FEC looked into this. They decided not to bring any cases. And so what Merchan and Bragg did is they tried to take, as you said, this accounting law and tried to turn it into a claim that Trump had somehow stolen the 2016 election. Well, the 2024 results, I think, give the lie to that.
So this is a real clear abuse of the justice system to go after a political rival. Final word.
Yes, and in fact, I think if Merchan goes ahead with this, and I think Trump would be entirely justified to think of ways to retaliate against New York City. For example, the Justice Department should investigate them for violating civil rights.
Okay. John Yoo, you're so smart. Thank you so much for breaking this down with us. It's good to have you back on. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Liz.
Then there's the immunity issue, ladies and gentlemen. That it's so there's three reasons why it's essentially already overturned. You heard John Yoo, legal scholar, law professor, stating July when the Supreme Court ruled that Trump was immune from criminal prosecution for official acts. And you have official acts. Speaking to Hope Hicks was an official act. You can't convict or prosecute a president for speaking to a political advisor or a staffer or a legal advisor or a general, or these are privileged conversations. These are classified conversations also that can't be shared in a court of law. But let's continue. So the immunity victory is just one reason why Trump will have this overturned.
Joining us now, incoming counselor to President-elect Trump, Alina Habba. Alina, we love talking to you. It's wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. First, do you have any more details on the alleged misconduct by the juror in this case?
I do. As part of, obviously I'm part of the team, but those are not ones that I am willing to share at this point. What I can tell you is it's definitely egregious, despite the redactions, and without getting into detail, it is not a questionable thing. There was misconduct by the jurors, and it would have anything thrown out. Now, one thing we are learning, as you've delicately said, but I will say more directly, Judge Merchan's description of what happened and what falls under the Supreme Court's decision is so flawed and egregious and so ridiculous. He is completely disregarding the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court that said that there is presidential immunity for official acts. And now he is trying to carve out in any way he can to preserve face and say that this trial was not a complete hoax, was not a complete disaster, an evidentiary disaster. And now we know there were issues with the jury being tainted. So, this is where we are. And this is where we've been for 3.5 years. And frankly, why I think we won.
Alina, so we've got allegations of a juror's misconduct in the case. Can you please tell us how this case is ripe for appeal? Legal experts have told us there are a lot of constitutional violations. The jury wrongly heard evidence that was protected by presidential immunity the Supreme Court upheld, like President Trump's conversations with Hope Hicks.
Those conversations can also be classified too, which is, you can't just simply... Could you imagine if somebody in President Obama's administration just came out and said, oh, I had a conversation with him? Like, for example, the Honorable James Comey. He said, well, Trump asks for loyalty. How are we supposed to believe any of that? It wasn't audio taped. Why didn't he just tape the president? Because he couldn't have done that. That would be highly illegal. These conversations, if Trump has a conversation with a director of, an intel agency, it's classified. If Trump has a conversation with Michael Cohen or Hope Hicks, it could very well be classified. These are the same people who pontificate about classified data. After Clinton, the Medal of Freedom recipient, it's like, the Medal of Freedom recipient had private servers. Could you imagine if Trump had private servers and a laptop like Hunter's? They would never allow that.
The judge delayed sentencing indefinitely. That's clearly a due process right to a speedy trial violation. And now juror misconduct, it sounds like that juror was tainted. There could have been bias here.
Yeah, let's add some to that. Statute of limitations, which before they brought this, we knew was passed. This case was passed up by Cy Vance. It was passed up prior by Bragg, and then it was brought again. How about we also discuss that the White House was coordinating and sent their own guy into work for the New York DA from the DOJ? How about that? How about selective prosecution, election interference, tying this man up in a hoax case during an election cycle when he should have been campaigning? How about all of the things you said? But this is where we have problems. The judge should have recused. We've said it time and time again. We have one thing standing right now before all the appeals we will take on this ridiculous decision today, and that is the motion to dismiss that this judge gave us leave to file. I don't have much hope in Judge Merchan, but we do have pending motions. Go ahead.
Sorry, Alina. So, Senator Chuck Grassley, has said this is really scary that all Americans, right or left, he's saying take the politics out of it. When you see the lawfare abuses, it could happen to you. It could happen to viewers. That's why millennial voters, we heard, were so scared about what the Justice Department and what cases like DA Bragg brought. They feel it could happen to them personally. This was a books and records misdemeanor, like a parking ticket, but it got ramped up into 34 felonies. That's terrifying for the American judicial system. Final word.
Yes. Yes, and he was not there. He was in the White House as president. These are acts that were done by an accounting team at the Trump organization. And there is so many uncanny things happening here. And the American people are afraid, and they should be afraid, but not anymore. Because I can assure you that when we go in and when this administration gets to work, it will be top of mind to fix this lawfare and prosecution against a political opponent or any American. It should not happen.
So it should never happen. And it's a very authoritarian, totalitarian, despotic thing to do, which is exactly why the Supreme Court will nullify Trump's conviction. They were talking about it months back. I mean, not really. There was just a couple of articles on whether the Supreme Court, but I'm telling you, it's already a done deal. This is Hans A. von Spakovsky. He is a former FEC chairman. In addition to the immunity issue, in addition to the federalism issue, a state cannot level a federal crime without the Department of Justice involved. You now have the fact that the FEC dropped the case. Here's why the FEC dropped the case. There was no crime.
I have the same reaction Francis Hakes does. This is a travesty, a miscarriage of justice. This was a phony prosecution from the very beginning. And for this jury, think about how many weeks this trial went on, how many witnesses came in, and in the very short time that the jury was out, they decided he was guilty on all 34 charges. This is a damage to the reputation of the American justice system like we have never seen. I have a colleague just got back from a conference overseas, and the reaction of lawyers and people there was that the United States has now gotten to be like the countries they are from, where the government uses its law enforcement powers to go after its political opponents. And that, I think, is exactly what happened here.
Hans, what was the underlying federal campaign violation? Did we ever find that out?
Well, there was nothing in the original indictment about any kind of federal campaign violation.
You can read the indictment. I've read the indictment. There's no reference to a specific statute. They reference in like glancing. There's a cursory reference to the Federal Election Act. That's it. But the Federal Election Commission dropped the case, and 3 former chairmen, one of whom is Hans A. von Spakovsky right here, have all stated there was no crime. They did not, from what I understand. The verdict, the indictment did not actually list a specific federal statute. That is, why not? Why don't you think, ladies and gentlemen, if you happen to stumble upon this, why don't you think that an actual federal statute was cited as Trump having broken that statute within the indictment or the verdict? You're supposed to know which federal statute is broken if you're guilty of a federal crime. What is the federal statute? And why don't we know the federal statute when it comes to Trump and this guilty verdict? So that's another reason why this will be overturned.
They kept saying that the legal expenses, which is what were listed in the business records, should have been a campaign-related expense, the payment that was made to Stormy Daniels. But as Brad Smith, I know, would have testified, under the test applied by the FEC, this was not a campaign-related expense, period. There's just no question about that. So for this jury to say that, oh yeah, he violated federal campaign finance laws and that justifies the underlying verdict, that is such an egregious mistake that the Court of Appeals in New York, when they get this case, they ought to reverse this almost immediately because of this and so many other mistakes made in the case.
How many do you count? How many mistakes?
I lost count of how many errors were made by this judge and by the prosecution. I mean, the judge let in all kinds of irrelevant evidence that had no bearing on the charges against the president, but were obviously there to blacken the character of Donald Trump. The judge shouldn't have even been on the case. He should have recused himself because of his personal family dealings, his daughter's involvement, his making political contributions in violation of the ethics rules in New York. There are just so many mistakes and errors he made that I don't see how a Court of Appeals could not overturn this verdict.
So here is exactly why you will have even John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett. It'll be 6-3. It could even be unanimous. This is John Roberts basically explaining why the New York verdict was unconstitutional. But this is the immunity case and him basically taking the special counsel legal team to task, stating, yeah, you can't convict Trump of a speech. They tried to say that he performed a speech, and therefore people tried to overthrow the government. It's like, what? These are very absurd leaps of logic. This is John Roberts right here.
So the Court of Appeals below, whose decision we're reviewing, said, quote, a former president can be prosecuted for his official acts because the fact of the prosecution means that the former president has allegedly acted in defiance of the laws. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think it sounds tautologically true, but I want to underscore that the obligation of a president is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed.
Well, I think it sounds tautologically true as well, and that, I think, is the clearest statement of the court's holding, which is why it concerns me. As I read it, it says simply, a former president can be prosecuted because he's being prosecuted.
Well, I would not suggest that that's either the proper approach in this case or certainly not the government's approach. A prosecution does, of course, invoke federal criminal law. The allegations have to be presented to a grand jury, which votes upon the indictment.
Well, that's what I mean, shortly after that statement in the court,
So the rebuttal is, well, there was a grand jury. Prosecutors take an oath to uphold the Constitution. Why would anyone want to break the law? I mean, politically motivated prosecutions would break the law. Well, the court system, especially when it comes to politics, always views in this, like when they went after Trump, all the courts that were tasked with trying to prosecute Trump, they did not believe or address the issue of animus by the prosecutors against Trump. They just accepted that there was absolutely zero political bias. It was simply because Trump broke the law. Well, he didn't break the law. That's why all of the cases against him fell apart very quickly. And now he has presidential immunity. So he's allowed to speak to Hope Hicks, Michael Cohen, and that can't be used against him in a court of law. That's another reason that the guilty verdict will be overturned.
Court's opinion, that's what they said, but there's no reason to worry because the prosecutor will act in good faith, and there's no reason to worry because a grand jury will have returned the indictment. Now, you know how easy it is in many cases for a prosecutor to get a grand jury to bring an indictment, and reliance on the good faith of the prosecutor may not be enough in some cases. I'm not suggesting here. So if it's tautological, and those are the only protections that the Court of Appeals below gave, and that is no longer your position, you're not defending that position, why shouldn't we either send it back to the Court of Appeals or issue an opinion making clear that that's not the law?
Well, I am defending the Court of Appeals judgment, and I do think that there are layered safeguards that the court can take into account that will ameliorate concerns about unduly chilling presidential conduct. That concerns us. We are not endorsing a regime that we think would expose former presidents to criminal prosecution in bad faith.
The Biden administration definitely was creating a precedent for political prosecutions in bad faith. You cannot say with good conscience and with sound mind that Trump's speech caused people to try to overthrow the government. They tried to paint Trump supporters, or people who voted for Trump 4 years ago as these mindless animals that, if you just give them any reason to be suspicious, they'll try to overthrow the government. We saw it on MSNBC, but we didn't see, of course, doors being opened and potential informants and everything else that Democrats and media have all said is, a fantasy, not true. And so this is why the average American has lost trust in media and politics in general. They keep saying Trump lies. He has probably told the truth more often than any president since George Washington. Okay. But Democrats don't like the truth. Or I should say, Republicans too don't like the truth. People don't like the truth. So when Trump tells it like it is, they can't stand it. Then they say, and then the Washington Post, he lied 30,000 times. They don't tell you that when you look at that tally, a good percentage are just absolutely true. Then a good percentage are like, it's hyperbole. It's not an outright lie. And then the lies are not about laptops or secret servers or, botched military, wars. These are like, petulant examples of just trying to say he lied. On the other hand, you had Biden stating that he was going to stay in the contest for 3 weeks. Did he lie every day? He said he was going to. Then they said, well, Biden won the primary. Did they lie? How could he have won the primary and then immediately immediately be removed? How is that even possible? But let's continue.
For political animus without adequate evidence, a politically driven prosecution would violate the Constitution under Waite versus United States. It's not something within the arsenal of prosecutors to do. Prosecutors take an oath. The Attorney General takes an oath. So I don't want to overstate Your Honor's concern with potentially relying solely on good faith. But that's an ingredient, and then the courts stand ready to adjudicate motions based on selective prosecution, political animus. This court relied on those very protections in the Vance case just 2 years ago.
But what concerns me is, as you know, the Court of Appeals did not get into a focused consideration of what acts we're talking about or what documents we're talking about because of its adoption of what you termed, and I agree quite correctly, as a tautological statement, because the fact of prosecution was enough to take away any official immunity. The fact of prosecution, they had no need to look at what courts normally look at when you're talking about a privilege or immunity question.
Well, I think I would take issue, Mr. Chief Justice, with the idea of taking away immunity. There is no immunity that is in the Constitution unless this court creates it.
And the courts, thanks to Democrats and the Biden administration, created that. Now the presidency is even stronger. Now Trump has a much stronger presidency. He's able to do a lot more things. They literally tried to ruin Trump, but they actually made him stronger, which it pretty much says all you need to know about Trump's adversaries. Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. Like I said, it doesn't really matter if you're left or right or Democrat, Republican. If you're suffering any place in this country, especially in the West Coast, God bless you. So many people have suffered. So many people have lost homes. So many people have, I know a great many people who've lost homes. And it's just terrible. And it's just terrible. And it's not pointing out incompetence, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, is not politicizing a tragedy. If there's a tragedy, the first question is, how did it happen? Why is this happening? And they blame Trump for 4 years ago, but Trump had far less to do with the suffering 4 years ago than local city or state politicians with the recent tragedies you hear in the news. Okay? If you run the largest city in the world, or one of the largest cities in the world, and you are, a wonderful, political party that's morally superior, and you claim to be the vanguards of the planet, and you consistently say that, wind, things are drier because of mankind's activities, great. why didn't you then prepare? Do you not believe your own ideology? Do you not believe the science? Do you not believe the consensus? I thought that you're at the forefront of protecting the planet. So that should explain that you knew, that you would have known that that all of this could have been prevented, or at least the suffering could have been mitigated. You could have been prepared. Nobody is saying that you could stop these tragedies immediately without any devastation. But if you're not prepared at all, and you're just completely incompetent, and things just don't work when they should be working, that's a big problem, especially for people who pontificate about what's going on in the world and all that, planet and all that, and it's because of human beings doing this and that. It's like, well, if you believe that, why weren't you prepared then? Why couldn't you foresee that this would take place, knowing that wind and all that is more extreme? Again, anyway, I'm speaking in roundabout terms for a reason. Hit subscribe to this channel, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you all. Hey, God bless you all, Democrat, Republican. It doesn't matter. If you're an American right now and you're suffering, God bless you. I urge, this is a respectful, I urge Democrats to treat their politicians in the same manner they treated Trump 4 years ago. You scrutinized Trump, blamed him for everything. Well, does that same behavior apply to the people directly governing you? Because Trump was a president and he didn't have the power to govern a state or a city. He really didn't. Local governance has a direct impact on the daily lives of citizens, And so if you thought that Trump was, the epicenter of everything wrong 4 years ago or 5 years ago, what are your thoughts now pertaining to the people who govern you that you put into office? And like I said, God bless you. I'm not pontificating or preaching. If you think they did a good job, great. If you don't think they did a good job, then maybe, I humbly, suggest perhaps voting somebody of a different political